Hi everyone, welcome to another yoga class with me, Nat. Today I wanted to offer you just a short introduction into yin yoga, which is slightly different from a lot of other yoga styles, more yang styles, which are very energetic, very active, very heat building. This style is very much the opposite. It's the counterbalance. We all know that yin yang symbol, the black and white symbol. Yin yoga is very still, very quiet, very cool, very passive. You will still feel sensations, but we will hold poses for a long period of time. It's not meant to be a white knuckle ride. It's not meant to be, you're not meant to build up a sweat or get out of breath in this practice. But in a world where we're used to being on the go the whole time, and what's happening next, I've got to be doing, achieving. Actually, it's really nice to balance that with a more yin approach. And at the moment, we're being forced to be more yin. Those of us who are at home, not working, because of the coronavirus and the lockdown associated with that, we are stuck at home. We're being forced to slow down and be more present and be more mindful. So yin is a really lovely way of embracing that change that is upon us at the moment. So it's all floor based, there's no standing poses. We're going to do just a handful of poses, but we'll hold them for some time. If you have some props, it would be really helpful to go and grab them now. I'm going to be using 2 of these foam blocks. I guess you could use, I'm not really sure, a good book, a big dictionary or something. But blocks would be great. If you haven't got them, don't worry. I'm sitting on a cushion, one of these yoga cushions, but if you have just a regular cushion, it just means, really in this starting pose where we're sitting cross-legged, if you've got your hips elevated, it just makes it a lot more comfortable. And also a blanket would be useful, because in some of the poses you don't want your, if your hip is floating in space a little bit, it's nice just to sort of nuzzle a bit of a blanket underneath, just to give your body something to rest on, but that's not going to stop you from getting deeper into the pose. Hopefully that will make a little bit more sense as we progress. So, to begin with, we're going to start sitting in this easy cross-legged position. For some people it's really not easy, so having that a prop underneath your hips is a nice way of tilting the pelvis forward slightly, which just helps you to stack your heart and the crown of your head above your pelvis. If it's a strain, if it's pinching in the hips, or if your knees are really high, you may want to sit on something a little bit higher, and instead of sitting cross-legged, you can kind of straddle it. You can have something like a taller cushion like that. That's sometimes quite comfortable. But I invite you, if it's available to your body at the moment, to sit, find an easy position, cross-legged. And we're going to start by closing the eyes and beginning to draw our attention to our breath. And there's no need to do anything with the breath just yet, just become aware of it. And try to draw all the strands, all the threads of your awareness, of your being. Try to draw them all in. And by that I mean all of those thoughts, all of those tasks, those things. I must do that, mustn't forget to do that, must call that person, must think about this thing. All of those threads are completely necessary because we are a connected being, but we sometimes just need to regroup. And these first moments of the class are an opportunity to regroup, I guess is a nice way of putting it. And yoga means to bind together, to bring together. So we're bringing together our body, our breath, our awareness, drawing everything in, becoming present, becoming whole, boosting our energy, and then stepping off the mat back into the real world. But that's one of the things I love most about yoga, is this almost an escape, this recharging my batteries, pulling my awareness inwards rather than outwards. And especially during a yin class, try to come back to your breath. Bring your awareness back to your breath. If the mind starts to wander, the breath is always there, the anchor that can keep you focused. Now start to elongate your breath, drawing the belly outwards as you breathe in. And releasing that breath, softening the belly. And inhaling again. And exhaling. And really delight in that little pause that you get at the top of your breath. Like at the top of a roller coaster, just before you release. Take a couple more rounds of breath. Full, deep inhalations, drawing the breath deep into the belly, almost directing the breath towards your pelvis. Before you then release. One more. Now we're going to do something called thymus tapping. So your thymus gland sits just behind your sternum, and it's really the powerhouse of your immune system. It's linked to the lymphatic system, and so by tapping it really gently, you stimulate your immune system, you boost your energy levels. It's very soothing. So just with the paddy parts of your fingers rather than the very tips of your fingers, if you've got long nails, that can be a little uncomfortable. So just use the pads of your fingers. You can do your index and middle finger, middle and ring finger. 2 is better than 1. And you're just going to tap very gently the central part of your sternum. So if you imagine your sternum comes from this dink where your collarbones meet, and then this point here where your ribs reach a point. That's your sternum. And it's about halfway down. Anywhere in this general area will still do the trick. And we're just going to really, really gently tap that area. And because the sternum connects to a lot of the ribs, not all the ribs, you don't need to tap it very strongly, very hard, for that vibration to be felt right the way around the rib cage. So really, I was going to say tap into that sensation, pardon the pun. Really become curious about how gently you can tap, but how much that vibration reverberates round. So we'll just do it for maybe 10 more seconds. It doesn't need to be very long. You can do this at any time of the day. I'd recommend you do it every day actually, especially now. It's really good for your immune system. And then rest both your hands on your knees. Take a moment to notice if that has triggered any sensations, any shift. It doesn't have to have done. We didn't do it for very long. Okay, we're going to start moving. So if you were sitting on a prop, move that out of the way and then come onto all fours. We're going to start twisting our spine very slightly. So from this all fours position, bring your left hand into the midline. My mat has got a line running down the middle, which is really helpful, but bring it directly underneath your head. The other hand is going to lift up. You'll open your chest out to the side, reach up, and then slowly thread that hand behind your left hand and drop your ear down to the ground. We'll do that twice more before we settle on the ground. So lift up, breathe in as you reach up, and twist, thread that needle behind your left wrist. And again, reach up. Last time. Really twist that spine. Your hips don't have to be square. Mine have kicked out to the side a little bit. And then twist down. So the back of your palm, of your left palm, rests on the mat. Your shoulder and your right ear. Back of my right palm, sorry. And then you can do whatever's comfortable with this hand. I like to press into my fingertips, press into the earth so that I can deepen the twist slightly. But you may want to rest down on that elbow. You may want to move that hand behind you, like that. But we'll just rest here for a moment, trying to soften, trying to allow all the muscles of the spine to gently release into the twist. So scan not only your spine, but your stomach muscles, your oblique muscles, your shoulder muscles, your hips. Is anything holding on to any tension that's preventing you from getting deeper into the twist? Because we're just melting into it. There's no... Yes, there has to be some activity in this pose because you need to hold yourself upright. But the idea is that you use the minimal effort, as little effort as possible, so that your body can twist into that structure that you've made. So a couple more breaths here. And then we press into the mat, peel ourselves off the mat, and then switch hands. So now my right hand is going to come directly beneath my nose. I'm going to open out to the side. See, my hips aren't staying square. I'm kind of kicking them forwards. Breathe in at the top, and then as you exhale, you can twist and drop down. Ooh, a few pops and cracks there. Breathe in, reach up, and breathe out to twist. Final time, breathe in, reach up, and breathe out. Twist. Drop your ear to the mat. So now my left ear, my left shoulder, and all the way down the back of my left hand, the back of my left arm is resting on the mat. I've got my right fingertips pressing into the mat, but you can choose whichever arm position feels comfortable so that you can release your hips, release your lower spine, and allow all the muscles and joints of your back to gently release into the twist. And then press your left hand into the mat, lift yourself up and come back onto all fours. Now this is where we're going to need the blocks if you have them. If you don't worry, you can do an alternative version of this pose, but I'll show you with the blocks. So I've got them on the, not on the tallest or on the flattest, the kind of middle height. I'm going to come up onto all fours. You might just want to watch this first and then find yourself in the pose afterwards. So I've got them, I'm on all fours so that the blocks are below my shoulders. Then this is where you need to be slightly careful because they can topple. But you're going to press your elbows into the blocks and then let your heart melt down through the gap. This is called praying mantis pose. So I've got my hands together in prayer pose, but it's a really delicious stretch. So if you want to find your way into the pose, and if you don't have blocks, you can do a variation without the blocks. So you just drop onto your elbows, maybe walk your elbows forwards a little bit so that you can soften your chest through that gap. It's not as deep a pose without your elbows elevated, but it is still a lovely extension of the spine. And we'll just spend a couple of minutes here. I've got my toes tucked under, but you can experiment with flattening the toes. I prefer to have them tucked under just for a little bit more stability. The point of holding these poses for time is to allow the muscles to release and relax and kind of almost get out of the way, so that the stretch, the sensation, the stimulation can reach the deep connective tissue. So your joints, ligaments, fascia, this network of this material that's around every muscle fibre, every joint. And it can get quite brittle, quite stiff. We're good at exercising our muscles and making ourselves stronger, but actually, as we get old, our connective tissue can become less pliable. I mean, we're not meant to have very stretchy connective tissue, but it can become very tight, very brittle, and can cause real stiffness and injury. So by really holding these poses for a longer than normal period of time, you should feel a sensation in each pose. You shouldn't feel discomfort, but you should feel some level of sensation, so that you know something is happening. There is a shift occurring at a deeper level in your body. So just a couple more breaths here. Before you press into your elbows, and because you've extended your spine, you may want to do a counter pose like child's pose. So just let your hips sink back onto your heels, drop your head to the mat, and draw your arms down alongside. You can have your knees together or slightly apart if that's more comfortable. And you can just allow your spine to slightly flex. So you've done that extension, and now you're just allowing the spine to settle in this counter pose, so your body can experience the rebound, the echo of the pose. And then on your next inhalation, slowly lift yourself up. Now we're going to come into Sphinx pose, which is another extension of the spine. So lay down on your stomach, and you're going to have your forearms on the mat, elbows bent, so we look like the Sphinx in Egypt. That's why it's called Sphinx pose. But your glutes will have a tendency to tense up here, because you'll naturally want to hold your body up using muscular effort, but the idea is that your muscles can relax and just get out of the way of these poses. So just gently rock your hips from side to side to make sure, kind of send a message to that group of muscles that they can relax, they can get out of the way, and allow the lower spine to experience this elongating stretch. So the front of your body is elongating, the back of your body, whilst it's being compressed, there shouldn't be a deep compression, more, it needs to be more balanced with extension. You can walk your elbows forwards more if you want to, if that feels too intense for you. But if you can have your elbows beneath your shoulders, fingertips spread wide, my heels are dropping out to the side, my legs, it doesn't matter what they're doing, they don't need to be making any effort at all. And I'm trying not to sink into my shoulders, so trying to keep a little bit of activity. Remembering that yin-yang symbol. One side is black, one side is white. But in each side there's a dot of the opposite colour. So in everything that's yin, there is always a little bit of yang. Likewise, everything that's yang, there's always a little bit of yin. So in this pose, the lower spine can soften and release, that lumbar arch. But you do need a little bit of yang effort to stop your chest from collapsing down and your shoulders becoming hunched. And you can keep your head looking up, eyes open or closed. But if that becomes too strong for your neck, you can gently lower your head down, stretching down the back of the neck. You'll feel a tug down your spine, but still maintaining that extension of the lower back. And just notice if any part of your body starts to creep in, and if any muscles start to tighten or tense. Keep scanning. Keep noticing which parts of your body are reacting in whichever way to this pose. Just spend a few more breaths here. Softening, releasing, bringing your awareness back to your breath if your mind starts to wander, which it will. Slowly walk your elbows forwards and out to the sides. Place one palm on top of the other, and then you can rest your forehead or one cheek on the palm. Bring your big toes together and allow your heels to drop out to the side. This is called crocodile pose, and it's a really nice, gentle counter pose for spinal stretches like Sphinx pose. And by having your heels out to the side, it opens up the sacrum, the sacroiliac joints, just a gentle release there. Now lifting the body up, we're going to move into caterpillar pose now, which is just a standard, very basic seated forward fold. So bring the legs out in front of you, straight in front of you. You may want to have, probably not a cushion, but you may want to elevate your hips slightly on a blanket perhaps. If you have any bulging disc problems, then I wouldn't lean forwards. The idea in a yin pose is that instead of straining to reach your toes, we're just curling. There's a word for it. Fern unfurls, but we're going to furl. The opposite of unfurling, we're going to curl inwards, dropping the chin to the chest. If if you have any bulging disc history or problems, I wouldn't recommend doing this. I would recommend leaning forwards, and if you elevate the hips, that will help relieve any discomfort. Your feet are completely relaxed. My toes naturally splay out to the sides a little, but they don't need to be doing anything. Drop the chin to the chest. If you want to have something handy, a cushion or something you can rest your head on, that's sometimes quite nice. And we're just going to spend a couple of minutes here noticing the sensations down the length of the spine. We've flexed our spine, we've extended our spine a lot. And now in this forward fold, we're moving it in a different direction. So just notice how it's responding to that. And again, notice how different parts of your body might be wanting to take centre stage, trying to support you in this pose. Try to soften and release. Your exhalation is the breath that will happen in. So as you breathe in, filling your lungs, and then as you exhale, softening and releasing. And just see if you can release anything. Your jaw, feel softness in the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, the back of the neck, between the shoulder blades. Allow that space to spread apart. Your elbows should feel heavy. Your belly is soft. The idea in yin is that we find our edge and we just linger there. We don't need to push through it. And when we're holding a pose for time, you may find that that edge shifts. So if that's the case, you can move a little deeper into the pose. Or if you start to experience pain rather than this slight discomfort perhaps, if it's pain, then you move out of the pose. But otherwise, we hold. We spend time, we linger, we pause. And we notice what comes up. Because it's when the water is still that we see ourselves truly. Now slowly start to lift yourself up out of this pose. And whatever your body's craving for now, feel free to do it. If you feel you just want stillness, if you feel you need to release your hips, sometimes this one is nice just to bring a little lateral movement to the spine and the hips. This windscreen wiper pose is quite nice. Sometimes you might want to lift your hips, get a little bit of movement back. The final pose before we relax is called square pose, and the idea is that you bring it's a cross-legged pose, but you want your shins to be square with the top or side edge of your mat. So rather than having your feet tucked in and this diagonal line with your shins, you want to get as close as possible as you can to having your shins square. And depending on how open or tight your hips are, your knees are going to be doing all sorts of funky things. So have props handy. I might put a blanket under my knee there, and I might put a cushion on top of my foot there. I don't want these props to stop me from reaching a depth in the pose. I don't want them to hold me up so that I'm not feeling anything. I just want them to support me so that gravity isn't making the pose unbearable, because it shouldn't be unbearable. It needs to be tolerable. But we need to feel some sensation. So from here you will feel it in your hips. This is a deep hip opener. If this is too much for you, then I would like to offer you deer pose. So it doesn't matter which side you do first, but you have one leg with the shin straight in front of you, and then you have the other leg with the shin roughly perpendicular to that, but really doesn't matter. You can have your foot tucked in more, you can have it out to the side more. You can see that this hip is rising up, so grab a prop, have it underneath there, but again I don't want it to hold me too much out of the pose, so it's up to you, deer or square. And we'll just spend a minute longer in this pose before we switch to the other side, because we need to balance it with the opposite leg at the top. So my edge has already shifted in this. Now I only need a prop underneath my elevated knee. I like to have my hands, one resting on my foot, one resting on my knee, just so that my awareness is in this top knee, because I don't want it to feel too twingy. The opening should be in the hips rather than the twist being in the knee. And because this is an unusual position, the sensations can be really quite intense. But I invite you to greet those sensations, I guess, without being hard on yourself, without forcing yourself to endure something that is really unbearable, but without I find these hip openers really interesting on an emotional level as well as a physical level, because I find myself becoming frustrated, sometimes a little angry. And part of that is because of the energetic release that's happening in your hips in this pose. And some of it is because it's a sensation I'm just not used to, or at least I wasn't until I practiced yin more often and understood those signals that my body was sending me. So very, very carefully lean back, release your feet, put your hands on the floor behind you, the mat behind you, and we'll gently rock our knees from side to side before swapping sides. So my knee that was at the top, which was this one, my left knee, is now going to be at the bottom. I'm going to rest my right foot on top of my left knee. I've got my props handy so I can stack myself up however I need to get into this pose. And you will find that both sides will feel very different, partly because you've spent a couple of minutes in one of the poses, on one side, and this side is kind of fresh to that sensation, partly because we're not symmetrical, so it will feel very different. Try to keep your chest lifted up rather than slumping down into the pose. Keep your chest lifted up, keep some vibrancy to the pose, but not at the expense of that softening. And it's so easy in this pose for the muscles to tense up around which is a good thing. This is a protective mechanism that your muscles have to protect ourselves from injury. So that's why we have the props here, to stop ourselves going too deep into the pose. But reach a point where you're at about 40%. You're not feeling nothing. You're not sweating because you're enduring this agonizing pose. You're just at a point where you can hang out, marinate in the sensations of it. And those sensations may come and go in waves. And remember your breath. Keeping the belly soft, not forcing the breath in any way, but just always coming back to that anchor that can hold your focus and your awareness inwards. A few more softening breaths here. See if you can release, soften, melt into the pose. A little more. And then gently release. So moving props out of the way. Just do a brief windscreen wiper, side to side, before we lay back in Shavasana. So I've got my blanket here, which I'm just going to drape over myself. I'll lay back. Let my feet, my toes fall out to the sides. Softening my spine. Lengthen my neck, so I'll just tuck my chin slightly into my chest, so the back of my neck can be long. My palms facing upwards to open up the collarbones, or sometimes it's nice to rest both palms on the belly, whichever is more comfortable. And you can spend as long as you like in this resting pose, Shavasana, which is sometimes the most difficult because you're asking your body literally to do nothing, to completely surrender to the earth. The longer you spend in this pose, the better. And when you're ready to move, be gentle, make the transition from resting to moving as compassionate as you can. Bring yourself to a seated position.